we have most people? Yeah, we got a lot of people. So great. So welcome everyone to this TX talk. This is really cool. The TX group is obviously a company formerly Time Media, but we've actually got a lot of external people joining this call, which is great as well. So today's speaker is Laura. Maybe just to briefly say, so we run this thing called TX Academy. And hold on, someone again in Hangout. So we run this thing in the group called TX Academy, which is about like digital learning and topics that are relevant to us in this space. And Laura, who works in our product and UX team, as a result of this lockdown, she was one of the first people who was like, right, we need to do remote UX research. People's lives have radically changed. We need to understand what's going on with them. So she's put together this talk in a really short time. Big respect to her, and I'll hand over to you, Laura. Take it away.
Cool. Thank you, Harry. So yes, also from my side, very welcome to this short talk on remote UX research and how to survive and thrive in it. Maybe quickly, so you know who's talking to you. So yes, I'm Laura. I'm a UX researcher at Pux, and I have about 5 years experience in UX research by now, and conducted over 20 remote user testings. Most of them were actually at YouTube, where I worked on the creator side, and for obvious reason, they were widely spread all over the planet. So to overcome time zone and location issues, we used remote user testings a lot there. So why is this interesting, or why is this fascinating? Due to the current situation, there are a lot of new users for digital products that aren't really used to handling them. I don't know if you've seen the video of the priest with the different Zoom animations, but it's quite worth watching. And also maybe elderly people or just not your typical target group might be interacting with your products now. This in general is interesting for me, which is why I do research, and I'm hoping to motivate you today to do some yourself. So what will we look at? So I will start with the differentiation between in-person and remote studies to set a bit the frame and context within research methods. Then we'll go over, look at some tools, and then I would like to go in a little bit more detail to differentiate between moderated and unmoderated studies before I give some general tips and a takeaway message to open then the round of questions and discussions. So if at any point you do have questions, please feel free to post them in the chat. And I'm looking forward to coming back to them at the end of the talk. Cool. So let's start. I'm curious, how many of you have already conducted some research in general themselves? Maybe ping a little I in the chat if you did. If you know where the chat is. Yeah. Ooh, so many. Yeah, Anna, right, never. Cool. And how many of you have already done remote studies? So maybe place a little R. Cool. So quite a few. I think this is going to be really interesting. Then to talk openly a little bit later. So for those who are not too familiar with the differentiation between in-person studies and remote studies, so in-person studies is basically the default. It is recommended to do in-person studies when possible, so you can better read the participants' body language, recognize when to ask a probing or a follow-up question, and also have more control over, you have more control over the environment because the person is in the lab and not at home. Also, a nice perk is that product teams can join like in person in real life, because I find that the effect is really different than when they're on the screen, maybe doing another task in parallel. So that is really a perk. But sometimes we just don't have the time or the money, or basically we just have the location constraints as we do now. And that's when we turn to remote studies. So they are cheaper to conduct because you can do them from wherever. So also dispersed target groups can be more easily recruited. That usually makes the process a little bit faster. And also if you have a target group with really specific criteria, you're more likely to be successful when recruiting for that specific group. So what I love most about remote studies is that you can actually get a sneak peek of the environment, the natural environment of the person you're talking to, and see how they interact with their own devices. So you can also test your product on different devices. That's pretty cool. So to set a bit of context on the user research method landscape in general, we have the dimensions of behavioral and attitudinal, which is basically the differentiation between what people do and what people say. And we also have the spectrum of qualitative research, which is more about the why and how to fix issues, as well as quantitative, and that is more about how many and how much. So as you can see with the lab studies as well as the remote studies, we're more in the behavioral sector, although attitudinal is also included sometimes. And yeah, you're more on the qualitative side if you do lab studies, simply because it's really costly to invite a lot of people to join you in person. So what kind of context factors influence the quality of remote study? If you have additional points, I'd be super happy if you add them in the chat. These are just the three that came to mind really quickly. So the first one is that you will have interruptions. It's quite natural and not controllable, especially because the participant is in their natural environment. So, which is good in the sense that you see how the product performs in this natural condition, because interruptions are really common, especially on mobile. You know, if a notification comes in, people jump in and out of other products and apps. The con to this is that the comparability is reduced, and that means also, and it also means that sometimes the test can take longer than planned, because there was just some problem. So my tip is that you should kind of repeat the task or the question that you asked if the interruption is longer than 15 seconds, because although you want to see if your product can help or can not help, but survive these interruptions so that the person can still get onto the flow and continue where they left off, you yourself in the testing situation don't want to take the risk that the person forgot part of the task, and thus you have less comparability again between the sessions. So another problem is the problem of connections. So in general, I think it's just good if you plan for connectivity issues. This way you don't have to rush through the questions in the end or through the tasks you were planning. And also there is not much you can do about that, unfortunately. So maybe in preparation, ask your users to do the speedtest.net test to see how good their connection is, and to reference this back to you, so you can check whether you give them the tip of using a LAN cable, or if you go for a different setup that just isn't that heavily dependable on a very good and very stable connection. A learning I had to learn the hard way is record your sessions outside the call tool. So once I lost a lot of recordings because there was some technical issues with the call tool itself. So you kind of want to avoid that, of course. Also, there is the technical hurdle, which the memes already gave away a bit. So your users might be less tech savvy than you and the people you're usually surrounded by. So the pros here is that you gain a non-tech savvy perspective onto your product. The con side is that the technical issues may frustrate the participants of your test, which introduces then a bias that wouldn't be there naturally outside the testing situation. So to avoid that, send a step-by-step guide so that people know how to set up the tools beforehand. And in case of questions, they can contact you before the session. Yes. So what kind of tools do we use to do moderated user testings? I'm really curious also about which tools you use. So if you use any of the four or another, please comment that in the chat as well. That'd be really cool to know. I'll quickly go through them. So Google Meet is very nice because it's easy to use, it's for free, and it now also has a recording option included. Quite handy. The cons is that because it is free, it has limited functionality in comparison to the other three tools I'll introduce. But in general, we can say it's quite nice. So if you're starting out and are looking for something for free, I can definitely recommend that. GoToMeeting is very nice because you can not only share your screen, but actually also the mouse and the keyboard. So in case if you have a prototype where you want to preload it so it doesn't get stuck in the process, or if there's something where you want to be sure that the NDA isn't broken because you're sharing the link of a prototype, I can really recommend this setup where you can just share your mouse and keyboard and people can interact with the prototype on your computer. The cons is that if this prototype is on mobile, then the camera freezes the face cam once you share the screen. So just make sure that you have a double setup where you also share, for example, the desktop camera if that happens. So here another con is that it starts costing after 14 days of trial, but it's not the most expensive one, so that's nice. Oh, sorry. Then for Zoom, we have the possibility to share multiple screens, to have searchable transcripts of the recordings available, and there's also end-to-end encryption, usually. So there the con is that sometimes the sessions are limited to 40 minutes. I don't know if you've encountered that, but I haven't fully gotten how to turn this on or off. And also it starts costing after 14 days, especially if you have searchable transcripts, etc. It can get quite costly. And the super pro tool is Lookback. What is really nice about it is that you can also set up unmoderated testings there, and you can record specific sequences of the test as highlight videos. You also have timestamped note taking, so if you record a note at a specific part of the video, it will reference you back, so you can insert the quote quite easily. And yeah, in GoToMeeting and Lookback, there's also an observer function, which is quite handy. The biggest drawback for me for Lookback is that you lose all your recordings when you cancel the subscription, because there is no way to export the recordings. So you also have to make sure that it is really stored safely and that only specific people have access to your Lookback account to ensure data privacy. Also here, we talk about quite a lot of money after the 14 days free trial. Yes, so obviously moderated or unmoderated user testings aren't the only thing we can do remotely. There are really a lot of tools by now to enable all kinds of user research methods to be done remotely. One of them is Optimal Workshop. I can highly recommend it for unmoderated card sortings because you also have the option to ask some questions before and after, and they have a recruitment user pool available. So does Usability Hub. They are quite nice for quick tests if you have specific elements where you want to conduct a 5-second test, preference test, or first click test. This tool will also help you guide you nicely through the process of setting it up. Then for focus groups and workshops, we mostly work with Mural because they have a very wide range of templates for different formats, and you have simultaneous and shared access. A lot today also use Miro. I don't know if you're a bigger fan of Miro or if you know any advantages Miro has that Mural doesn't. Again, please comment in the chat. I'm curious for your inputs. Yes, then we work with Qualtrics to set up complex surveys. So also for unmoderated testings, you can set them up there. And you have the possibility to ask optional, conditional questions, have a varying logic path depending on the answers that have been given beforehand. So you have a lot of possibilities to guide your users through a more or less customized survey. If you want to keep it simple, or if you're looking for a tool to set up a screener quickly and easily, I recommend Google Forms. There it's very nice that you also have the possibility of just getting your results summarized in an automated way, and actually more or less nice, except if they use the pie charts. Then last but not least, there is also Hotjar. I really like them for their click heat maps and the integrated like the intercept surveys they have, and also that you can place these depending on the actions that have been taken beforehand on the website. So you can really increase your understanding of specific interactions. Yes. So let's go over to moderated and unmoderated remote studies and their difference. Have you ever conducted an unmoderated remote study? Anyone, please speak up. No? Indirectly. Yeah. Yes, Anna. Cool. I'll ask you later to join me in the blah blah. So maybe to give a quick overview of what differentiates the two. In moderated testings, participants and facilitators are communicating directly. So facilitators can ask clarification or follow-up questions after tasks are completed. And also they can gently nudge a quiet participant to think aloud if he's not doing it naturally. So because we're still in the setting where we have less non-verbal cues than on-site, I recommend to invest 3 to 5 minutes in the beginning of the session to really get to know your participant a little better. Maybe ask them about how they're handling the current Corona situation, just so you get a feeling for how they speak, how expressive their facial expressions are, and so on. It's going to help you a lot to get a better understanding of when you're evaluating later on. Use cases for moderated remote studies are usually general overview of the product or the service. the flow of the product or the service, and also explorative research questions, because you can have this kind of interview type of conversation. For unmoderated remote studies, if it shows up, yep, participants can complete the study by themselves and on their own time. So that increases the flexibility of your participants a lot, and it potentially also reduces the time it takes to conduct all the sessions by a lot. So the drawback there is that you don't really have the opportunity to ask detailed questions depending on previous answers or previous actions. And also, if someone skipped the task or failed to complete what was asked of them, you don't know until after the session. So also, again, you don't have the possibility to remind them to think aloud, which is really, it's just a shame when you set it up so concentrated and then you end up with not enough data. So really make sure to also recruit more participants for unmoderated remote studies. More to that in the example. So use cases here are very specific elements of a product or when the time frame is very tight. So coming to the examples, the first one is a moderated remote mobile user test that we did. We checked the user's search flow through a C2C marketplace. And as you can see, we recruited 10 participants, so also a little more than for an on-site testing, because the rate of no-shows is just in general a little bit higher when doing the research remotely. And the setup was as follows. So we usually did this in GoToMeeting, but you can also do it in Hangouts, that participants share their mobile screen, but also share their desktop face cam, so the body language becomes more visible. Here you see Anna. She's currently conducting very complex remote testings, but she's rocking it hard. A learning there is that the better defined and the simpler the user tasks are, the more you can avoid unnecessary confusion, because there is already so much complexity within the prototype that you want to keep the rest of the task fairly easy and straightforward. This will also help you as facilitator to then evaluate the relevant cues later on in the analysis phase. Another tip I can recommend is to not blab. Sometimes the silence can be hard to endure because you don't know if it's due to confusion, content immersion, if it's the audio getting stuck. So try to endure it and only nudge the participant after completing the task to clarify why he or she was silent. Usually this will give you more insights than when you right away ask, can you still hear me? And what are you thinking? So give your users a little time. The second example I have is an unmoderated remote user test. Here we have a business partner, Applause, and they usually set up those unmoderated testings for us. So for all TX Markets internals, if you're interested, please reach out. So usually they also set up their unmoderated testings in Qualtrics. And for this specific case, we looked at the user's perception of a competitor's seller page. As you can see here, we recruited nearly 30 participants, only 25 participated in the end. So you see, it was good to have some more. Also, because it's unmoderated, you aim for a lot more than if it's a moderated testing, just to ensure that quality. Here is the setup. So people were just showing their screen. And this is actually really all you can see in an unmoderated testing. They record their screen. You see what they look at at this moment. Well, you don't actually see what they look at, but the display. And then afterwards, they just answer some survey questions. So yeah, because the cognitive load is really hard for the participant, so they're not used to recording themselves talking while they complete a task that might not be completely natural to them. Also, they're interacting with a website they may have never seen before, so it's a lot on their mind. The more you can take away from this cognitive load, the better. So if you, for example, give some answer options instead of having everything in open answer format, you can already reduce some of the complexity of the setup. Here, my tip is to definitely use quality checks. So if you can define a minimum duration for tasks, or if you can reverse a question in your questionnaire, please do so, and try to use several quality checks, because sometimes participants just have to rush through it because they have to go somewhere, or there has been an interruption now, especially with kids also staying home. And it would be a shame if you then have bad quality data in your sample. Yes, so to sum this up a little more, here an overview over the most common hurdles and how to overcome them. So practice the technology and have a plan A, B, C, and D if possible. So test the different setups, the tools, the instructions, and also alternatives for them. Because let me think, I don't think I've ever conducted a remote user testing where all the sessions went without any technology problems. Maybe one. Yeah, so it's really worth investing time in the preparation. Also, pilot test the content, especially for unmoderated sessions. The questions and the tasks have to be self-explanatory. So you really want to make sure that you're not misunderstood. Also, try to be available. So in moderated sessions, try to sign in early so you can answer some questions if there are any about the setup. And for unmoderated studies, try to offer either an email address or a phone number where people can call with questions, so they feel supported and not completely left alone in the process. Also, like I said, recruit more users because no-show rates are higher. And if you're in general a little new to user research, I mean, most of you seem to be quite experienced, but if you're new, it's helpful to also check out best practices for online on-site interviews, because most of those best practices can also be applied in remote research. So really get your nerd on, and also use the mute function in time if you have if you're calling into the same call from two devices in the same room. I think most of us have experienced the painful screeches if there are more than one device from the same room calling in and not being muted properly. Yeah, so special times call for special measures. I really hope that this intro is helpful to you to create value where it is needed. You can find that out by talking and listening to users, because it's now is the time to show them that you care about them. So invite them to talk to you, and if you have any questions, let's hear them. Thank you. More to read also here. I will share the slides later.
Thank you, Laura.
Yeah, that was great.
Thanks, Laura.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for joining.
So did we convert anyone who isn't already remote testing to try some?
Yeah, totally.
Correct answer. Yes. So thanks everyone for joining us. It was really great to see so many people, and yeah, I mean, we have to do more of this kind of stuff. On the website tx.academy, I share it quickly, you'll find some of the courses we're doing. And if we have more of this kind of stuff, we'll put it up there and share it on LinkedIn and this kind of stuff. I'll also, or Laura will, one of us will share her slides. Yeah, we will do more. Cool. Otherwise, yeah, have a great time at home in these crazy times. And yeah, I'll send the slides via email. Or actually, we could even, do you have the link right now? You could put it on the chat maybe, Laura.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Let me quickly grab that. Place here.
Also, if anybody has any questions, I think Laura and I are both happy to stick around to answer them.
Yes, for sure.
Who said that?
Sorry, I just realized my camera is not on, but Anna said that. Hi.
I mean, the real questions is changing your Zoom background. It's the most.
It told me I had to download something and I was skeptical.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I love this Zoom, people. Thank you for this. Really.
Laura, actually, I do have a question. And in the beginning, I think you mentioned that once you recorded via a call tool, and then your recordings weren't available anymore. How come, and which tool did you use?
So that was back at YouTube. I used GoToMeeting there.
Right.
And we only recorded within the GoToMeeting tool instead of also having a recording outside. And there were connectivity issues on my end, so I fell out of the call. And then once I dialed back in, I noticed that the recordings of all the sessions that happened up to this point were gone.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So for recording tools, I can recommend ScreenFlow, or if you work with Mac, QuickTime itself.
Yeah. Because I was now for my next remote test, I was thinking about doing the recording via GoToMeeting.
Yeah.
Because it seems very tempting, but in that case, I might think twice about it.
Yeah. So if you're connected via LAN cable directly to your provider, then you should be fine. But if not, better outside.
Okay. Thanks, Laura.
You're welcome.
Laura, I have a question. This is Emily.
Hi.
Hi. So I just wanted to ask, and maybe it's a bit of a stupid question, but I'm currently working on a government project, and people are really restricted in terms of what they can install on their laptops. So, for example, I tried to use Lookback, but they couldn't install the Chrome extension. And I've kind of essentially been warned that it could be that I just have to phone them on their phone and talk them through, or better, they have to talk me through what they're seeing on the screen, which is not ideal. I'm wondering if anybody has ever had to record a phone conversation rather than a screencast of what they're looking at. If not, don't worry. I thought it was pretty bonkers to have to do that, but I might have to. So I thought I'd ask.
Yeah. So let me quickly check. I don't have an iPhone. I have an Android. Disclaimer for the tool. So they do have this recorder integrated, and it should also work. Like if you have the possibility to have two phones, so one for recording and one for speaking, I think it makes your life easier. But if you have to do it on the same tool, maybe just try by a recording tool on your mobile.
Okay.
But I don't have a specific recommendations rather than the one that is already integrated.
Okay, great, thanks. I'll do some practice rounds before.
Yeah.
Another thing
That's a
to
good
look
idea.
at, Emily, for both GoToMeeting and Google Hangouts, you don't actually have to install anything as far as I'm aware, at least not on your desktop.
Yeah, so I know.
Mobile device.
Yeah, So hopefully they have access to Google Hangouts, because they all have, I know they use Gmail. But I've had this in the past where I've just kind of ran discovery with a few people who they just didn't know how to use it. It's also a question of, I guess, how familiar they are with the tools and what they can do. So then as an easy fix, they just say, well, can you give me a call? And so I was just kind of thinking, covering all my bases and thinking, if that's going to happen, how do I tackle it?
Absolutely. So I have interestingly been in the situation where I was on a Google Hangouts call with a woman who was not very tech savvy, and we had a lot of struggles getting it to work completely over Hangouts, but she did work out how to share her screen, and then she did additionally call me on her phone.
This is a bit like when my grandmother asked me to buy a DVD on Amazon by phoning them up.
Nice.
And it is a usability test that you had to do, or was there any, or you will have to do, or is there any other way?
So this is a great question. So I'm thinking, actually, if this is going to be the situation, that I'm going to have to change my research method. And instead of going for usability testing, which will be really hard, unless they're really vocal and they can really tell me what's going on the screen and in their brain. Yeah, I might have to think of an alternative, and but without seeing people's faces as well, I find it hard. So I thought maybe a focus group, but then again, it would be really nice to have everybody on camera, like in a Zoom kind of situation. Yeah, I might actually resort to changing my research method just because I can't see their screen. Because it is uncomfortable to just, also tackling those silences becomes harder because you really have no idea what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, if it's related to usability, maybe consider an alternative for sure.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's not only conducting them, but also evaluating is going to be really, really tricky, because you have so many factors that add to the uncertainty of how to interpret the things that have.
Yeah, super hard. And
depending
also, I think,
on what exactly you're testing, one workaround I've found is actually sharing the prototype on my own screen and kind of walking the users through step by step a little bit more. With the disclaimer that that's only useful if you're testing their understanding of concepts more than the actual like functionality of a prototype.
Yeah, that's a good idea. If to share my own screen and basically pretend it's a paper prototype and they just have to tell me where to click and so on.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I think I'll have to rethink how to do it. Because in other times I would just show up at their office at that point, if that's a difficulty.
There are tools out there, I can't name one right now, but where you can install something. If it's like a website you're testing, that you install something on the web server and then you can follow their session as they interact with the web server. I don't know if you have access or are able to install like additional tracking codes in a website, but I see, for example, mouseflow.com, but that's just from Google and not from any experience.
Right, okay, so ask them almost to do an unmoderated test, or moderated, but their screen is being recorded.
Yeah, so you have them on a call, maybe on their phone, and then hopefully with this tool, I've certainly heard of other tools in the past where you could then like follow a session remotely, and it's basically on the server tracking their activity and then forwarding it to you. But the tool I just shared, I don't know if it's actually a usability tool or just more an analytics tool.
Okay, I'll have a look. Mouseflow. I'll have a look now. Thank you. Maybe one other question I have is, do you find observers disruptive, or helpful? So for example, look back allows you to have people observing the session and in the chat telling you what they think and, you know, what they think you should be asking, etc. Would you encourage that, or actually in your experience, would you push back a bit and maybe just have one key observer?
Yeah, that is a really, really great question. And I strongly recommend to have observers with you as often as possible. On the one hand, because for them, seeing the real deal in person is really cool. And on the other hand, for you, it also helps because they can help you with note taking, and they also can help because you have someone to exchange about how that session went. You can kind of avoid, again, your own bubble, and maybe the observer has seen things that you didn't notice because you were moderating. So I would definitely recommend to have observers. However, to avoid them asking questions as well and participants getting confused as to who they should respond now and what's actually happening, try to onboard your observers in the way that they know that they can ask questions themselves, but that you will give them a dedicated time range to do so, so they don't interrupt you and the testing flow in general.
Brilliant. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. So I guess if there's no more questions, thanks a lot everyone who's still here for attending, and finally a big thank you to you, Laura, for making this happen. Super cool.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah.
And also thanks everyone for joining.
I'll catch up with you, Laura, in a second. Maybe I'll send you a hangout link, just briefly, so we can wrap up.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Not Laura, Laura.
Bye, guys.
Laura, sorry, Laura.
She doesn't like if you call her Laura.
Okay.
My name is Laura.
Thank you.
Hey, Laura.
Bye.
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 Thanks a
Bye,
lot.
everybody. Bye, Harry.